I got home at 3 a.m. after my flight was canceled. A man opened the door and yelled, "Baby, someone's here to see you." I heard her voice say, "Tell him I'm asleep." The airport felt like a ghost town when they announced the cancellation. I had spent the entire day sitting through meetings that could have been emails, only to end up sleeping on a plastic chair in a terminal that smelled like reheated pizza. When they offered hotel vouchers, I didn't even think twice. I just wanted to go home. My flight wasn't supposed to land until morning, so no one, especially Sierra, expected me back. That thought should have been comforting. It wasn't. Driving through the city at 3 in the morning, I noticed how every street looked staged, as if the world had been paused and only I was moving through it. I remember glancing at our house from the car. Every light was off except one, the warm glow spilling through the curtains of our bedroom window. I smiled for a second, thinking she'd fallen asleep watching a movie again. But as I unlocked the front door, something strange happened. The door opened from the inside. A man I'd never seen before stood in the doorway, barefoot, wearing nothing but jeans. He froze like he'd seen a ghost. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he shouted toward the hallway, his voice loud and casual, like he lived there. That's when I heard it. Sierra's voice, groggy, playful, pretending to be asleep. She said not to answer. The man hesitated, then muttered something under his breath and brushed past me, heading straight for the back door. He didn't even look back. I could have stopped him, asked his name, punched him, anything, but I didn't. I just stood there. The silence after he left was unbearable. It was the kind of silence that doesn't fill a house, it empties it. Sierra appeared in the hallway wearing one of my shirts. Her hair was messy, her face pale. She looked confused at first, then terrified. She asked why I was home early, like it was some kind of crime. I said nothing. I walked past her, sat down at the kitchen table, and placed my phone face down in front of me. I wanted her to feel every second of that silence, every drop of cold air between us. She began spinning stories, each one worse than the last. First it was the neighbor checking on her, then it was her cousin stopping by, then she didn't know who the man was. The words came out fast, one lie tripping over another. I didn't respond to any of them. The stillness made her unravel faster than shouting ever could. After a while, she started crying. Real tears or not, I couldn't tell. She asked if we could talk in the morning, that she'd explain everything. I told her I'd stay just for tonight. Her relief was instant, too instant. She thought that meant forgiveness. It didn't. She went upstairs eventually. I stayed downstairs, staring at the half-empty glass of wine on the counter and the faint lipstick stain on the rim. I noticed the man's car keys lying next to it. A small metallic emblem glinted under the kitchen light, an engraved logo of Blake Construction, Sierra's father's company. I held the keychain in my hand for a long time. I'd worked for that company once, years ago, before Sierra and I started dating seriously. I knew the initials on that logo, HBC, Harold Blake Construction. The realization came slowly, then all at once. Whoever that man was, he worked for her father. It wasn't just infidelity, it was stupidity, arrogant, careless stupidity. I left the house before sunrise, careful not to wake her. I didn't take any luggage, just my phone and wallet. My car was parked at the curb, and as I sat inside, I noticed another vehicle parked 2 houses down, a silver sedan. The same logo was printed on its windshield sticker. I waited. The porch light flicked on, and a shadow moved behind the curtain upstairs. The man had come back. I saw him walking quickly toward the car, glancing around, then driving off. My chest didn't burn with rage, it went cold. That's when I understood something. Sierra hadn't been trying to hide him. She'd been comfortable, confident that I wouldn't find out. That confidence was going to cost her everything. When she woke up later that morning, I was gone. But I made sure the silence stayed with her. Every joint account was frozen, every credit card canceled. The password to our mortgage account changed. I didn't do it out of revenge. It was precaution. I knew her patterns. She would try to spin this, manipulate her father, play the victim. I had to make sure the narrative didn't start before I was ready. By 9 a.m., I was sitting in a coffee shop near the downtown construction offices. I hadn't slept at all, but my mind was sharp, electric. I looked up the employee list of Blake Construction from an old contact database I still had access to. The name appeared sooner than I expected. Justin Wardell, project manager. That was him. Married, 2 kids, and a reputation for taking credit for other people's work. I remembered his face from a company barbecue years ago. Loud laugh, flashy watch, the kind of man who always called women sweetheart, even when it wasn't appropriate. Sierra had chosen him, not because he was better than me, but because he was convenient, close enough to feel thrilling, safe enough to seem temporary. By the time I got home that afternoon, she had left a dozen messages and texts. She said we needed to talk, that it wasn't what I thought, that I should come home before things got worse. I ignored them. She had no idea that worse had already started. When I finally returned that evening, I found her sitting on the couch pretending to be calm. She tried to smile, tried to make small talk as if last night hadn't happened. Her phone was upside down on the coffee table, screen lighting up every few minutes with messages she pretended not to see. I told her she didn't need to explain anything. She blinked, confused, until I added that I had already spoken to her father. Her color drained instantly. I hadn't actually spoken to him yet, but her reaction confirmed everything. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a betrayal, it was an opportunity. Every ounce of emotion I had left started to turn into precision. There was no screaming, no destruction, no theatrics. I was building something else, something measured. I wanted her to feel the way I did when that door opened. That sharp, hollow drop of disbelief, that instant shift when the world you built stops making sense. Before she could say another word, I went upstairs, packed a small bag, and left again. I didn't tell her where I was going. I didn't tell her if I'd be back. That night, while driving toward the city lights, I realized the exact moment everything ended wasn't when I found out she cheated. It was when I decided I wouldn't forgive her. Forgiveness, I thought, is what people give when they still hope. I had none left, only plans. And the first one would start the next morning with a phone call to Harold Blake himself. The next morning, I woke up in my car, parked 3 blocks from Harold Blake Construction. The air outside was heavy with early traffic and concrete dust. I hadn't slept more than an hour, but adrenaline had replaced rest. Every motion I made felt deliberate, as if I were walking across a chessboard and each step mattered. Harold Blake had always treated me like the son he wished he had. When Sierra and I got engaged, he congratulated me with an envelope containing a down payment for our house. He said I was the steady type his daughter needed. That phrase used to sound flattering. Now it just felt like a prediction. Steady men make easy targets. I walked into his office around 9. The receptionist recognized me instantly, told me Harold was in a meeting. I waited in the lobby, watching employees rush by, holding blueprints, coffee, and nervous energy. Among them, I caught sight of Justin Wardell. He didn't notice me at first. He was walking fast, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and angry. When he finally saw me, he froze. That same deer-in-headlights expression he wore when he opened my door last night. He stammered a greeting and quickly disappeared into the hallway. I smiled for the first time since that night. When Harold came out of his meeting, his usual confident energy faltered slightly when he saw me. He invited me into his office, asked about my trip, joked that Sierra had been glued to her phone waiting for my return. The irony almost made me laugh. I told her the flight had been canceled and I'd gotten back early. I mentioned seeing Justin casually as if making small talk and said I was glad Harold had someone like him mentoring Sierra's team. His brow furrowed. He said Sierra didn't work under Justin's department and there was no reason they'd have contact outside board events. That was my first confirmation. I didn't need any proof beyond that expression. Before I left, Harold invited us both to dinner later that week to discuss wedding plans and some new family developments. I agreed, knowing that would be the stage for the next act. When I got home, Sierra was pacing the living room. Her eyes were red, her phone clutched like a lifeline. The moment she saw me, she started talking fast, saying she'd been worried that we needed to talk before her dad heard anything. She must have already known he'd seen me. I told her to sit down. No anger, no shouting, just flat calm. I placed my laptop on the coffee table and opened our shared account transactions. There they were. Hotel bookings in her name, charged to my card, dating back 3 months. 2 cities, multiple weekends I thought she'd spent visiting her mother. She looked at the screen like it was written in another language. When she started denying, I opened the drawer next to the couch and placed the keychain from last night beside her. She went pale. She said she'd made mistakes, that Justin was helping her through a difficult time, that she had felt neglected. Every excuse felt rehearsed, like she'd been preparing them for weeks, waiting for this day. I listened without interruption, the way you'd listen to static. When she ran out of words, I told her about the message I'd received that morning from Justin's wife, Laura Wardle. Sierra's eyes widened in horror. Laura had called me after finding messages between her husband and Sierra on their shared tablet. She wasn't angry, just exhausted. She told me she'd known something was off for months, but never imagined it was someone connected to Harold's family. She asked to meet. I told Sierra I'd agreed. The color drained completely from her face. She started pacing again, mumbling that I didn't understand the situation, that Laura was unstable. But her panic told me everything. Laura wasn't the problem. Laura was the threat, the first real one Sierra had faced. That night, I met Laura at a diner near the highway. She looked older than her age, with the kind of quiet resignation that comes after years of disappointment. She said Justin had been siphoning money from Harold's company accounts through dummy suppliers, and that Sierra's name appeared in the paperwork as one of the consulting partners. Whether Sierra knew what she was signing or not didn't matter. The trail existed. Laura showed me copies of invoices and bank transfers. I recognized Sierra's signature. It hit me that my fiancée wasn't just cheating, she was helping commit financial fraud for the man she cheated with. I didn't feel pity, just clarity. Laura said she didn't plan to report it immediately. She wanted to corner Justin first, make him face her. She asked for my help gathering more evidence, saying it could clear Sierra if she cooperated. I told her I'd think about it. I wasn't doing this for Sierra's sake, but I wanted to know how deep the rot went. When I got home that night, Sierra was waiting again, eyes swollen, a glass of wine in her hand. The house smelled like desperation. She started talking the moment I entered, saying she'd end it with Justin, that she wanted to fix things. She promised it was over. I stood there, letting her speak, until she said something that froze me completely. She said she was pregnant. The words landed without sound. I looked at her. She wasn't crying anymore. She was studying me, trying to read my face, waiting for any sign of softness. She didn't get one. I asked how far along. She said around 8 weeks. The timeline lined up perfectly with the first hotel booking I'd seen. She said she wasn't sure who the father was. The way she said it, flat, emotionless, as if it were a business statement, made my hands tremble for the first time. I left again that night. Didn't slam the door, didn't say anything. I needed distance, because for the first time, anger wasn't enough. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was contamination. Over the next few days, Laura and I exchanged information. She was smarter than I expected, calm, methodical, driven by purpose rather than vengeance. Together, we pieced together enough documents to expose both Justin and Sierra if we wanted. Then Harold called. He said he wanted to host a private dinner to rebuild trust before the wedding. He said Sierra had told him we'd been arguing about finances. He had no idea the real storm was just beginning. I told him we'd be there. After hanging up, I looked around the apartment one last time. Everything in that house had a ghost attached now. The couch, the coffee cups, the stairs we once raced up laughing. I spent the night planning the order of events in my head like blueprints. Who would speak first? What would be revealed? And how to make sure Sierra saw everything collapse in the same calm silence I gave her that night when the door opened. She thought she'd escape the consequences, but the dinner she was preparing for wasn't going to save her engagement. It was going to end her reputation, her father's company, and whatever fragile illusion she'd been hiding behind. And I'd be sitting across from her, watching it happen without raising my voice once. I hadn't seen Sierra for 3 days before the dinner. She'd been texting constantly, sometimes apologetic, sometimes furious, sometimes pretending nothing had happened. I didn't reply. I wanted her to walk into that restaurant without knowing what I had planned. Her confusion was the last gift I'd ever give her. Harold Blake had chosen an upscale place downtown, a private dining room reserved under his name, the kind of restaurant that served food too small to justify the price. I arrived early, wearing the same navy suit I'd worn to our engagement party. It still smelled faintly of champagne and burnt lies. The staff had already set the table. 8 chairs, gleaming silverware, soft light glinting off the glassware. I placed a small black folder in front of my seat. Inside were copies of the documents Laura and I had compiled. Invoices, signed authorizations, and the paternity test I'd paid for discreetly through a private clinic. Sierra didn't know I'd managed to retrieve a DNA sample from her used toothbrush and a strand of hair she'd left on my jacket. At 6 sharp, Harold entered first. He looked proud, carrying the confident air of a man who believed family dinners could fix anything. Sierra followed, wearing a pale blue dress and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her gaze darted to the folder in front of me, then to my face. She didn't ask what it was, but her fingers twitched when she reached for her chair. Justin arrived minutes later, late enough to appear self-important. He had that smug, polished look of a man who always thought he'd land on his feet. His wife, Laura, came last, uninvited but expected. She wore a calm expression that didn't match the tension in her jaw. I told her to come quietly and sit through the first half. She agreed. She wanted him humiliated publicly before his fall. Harold started the dinner with polite talk, wedding dates, venues, moving forward as a family. I played along, answering his questions as if nothing had happened. Sierra smiled tightly, her hands trembling under the table. The silence that followed dessert was the opening I'd been waiting for. I leaned forward, slid the folder across the table, and told Harold there was something he should see before the wedding. He frowned, but opened it. The first page held a simple title, Unauthorized Consultant Transactions, HBC Projects, Quarter 2. He flipped through a few pages, eyes narrowing with each line. Sierra's signature appeared repeatedly alongside Justin's. The total siphoned amount was small enough to avoid suspicion, but large enough to indicate intent. When Harold looked up, confusion had already turned into disbelief. Sierra started speaking fast, insisting she didn't understand what those papers were. Justin's face went pale. Laura, still silent, reached into her purse and placed a flash drive next to the folder. She said it contained audio recordings of Justin discussing those accounts with Sierra over the phone. That was the first explosion. Harold's hand trembled slightly as he poured himself a drink. He muttered that he'd built his company from the ground up, that no one, especially not his daughter, would stain it for quick money. Sierra reached for him, but he pushed her hand away. I thought that would be the end of it, but there was still the second fuse waiting to burn out. When the shouting quieted, I reached for the folder again and pulled out one more document, the paternity report. I said I had it tested privately after Sierra's confession. My voice was calm, controlled. The words felt like stone dropping into water. The report confirmed what I already knew. The child wasn't mine. It was Justin's. Sierra froze completely. Harold stared at her, face blank. Justin tried to deny it, saying it was a setup, that I'd fabricated it to humiliate him. I told him I didn't need to fabricate anything. The clinic's verification was notarized. Laura didn't move. She just watched him destroy himself. The second explosion was louder than the first. Sierra broke down, sobbing into her hands. Harold stood up so suddenly his chair fell backward. He shouted that she'd embarrassed him, betrayed his trust, and ruined the company's reputation. Justin tried to leave, but Harold stepped in front of him, shaking with rage. I thought he'd hit him. Then came the third and final blow. Laura reached into her bag again and placed one last item on the table, a printed copy of an email exchange between Justin and Harold's financial officer. It revealed that Justin had used Harold's company name to secure unapproved loans through subsidiary accounts. Sierra's consulting signature had verified them. That revelation connected every thread. Not only had she destroyed our relationship, but she'd also helped jeopardize her father's entire business empire. The table fell silent except for the low hum of the air conditioner. I didn't say anything. There was no need. Harold's company would be investigated within days. Justin's career was over. Sierra's name was on documents she couldn't explain. She looked at me then, eyes red and desperate. For the first time, she understood this wasn't anger anymore. It was closure. She whispered something under her breath that I couldn't hear. Maybe she was apologizing, maybe cursing me, maybe begging for help. I didn't ask. Laura stood and walked out first. Justin followed, muttering threats that no one listened to. Harold stayed seated, rubbing his temples. He asked me what I planned to do now. I told him I was done with Sierra, but I wanted to make sure his company survived the scandal. He nodded slowly, almost ashamed, and said he'd transfer ownership of one of their smaller divisions to me to protect it legally during the audit. When the dinner ended, Sierra didn't move. She sat there, staring at the empty glass in front of her, face streaked with tears, makeup fading under the soft restaurant lights. I left her there. By the time I got home, her belongings were already packed. I'd done it the night before, expecting this ending. Everything she owned, clothes, jewelry, makeup, letters, was stacked neatly in boxes by the door. The engagement ring sat on top. I didn't wait for her to arrive. I left the keys on the counter and drove to a hotel. When she finally came home that night, she found a single envelope taped to the door. Inside was the deed to the small apartment we first rented when we started dating, signed over to her name. There was no note, no goodbye, nothing left to explain. It wasn't revenge, it was balance. The next morning, I received a call from Harold. He said Justin had been fired and that the auditors were combing through the books. He sounded like a broken man, thanking me for my discretion, for not destroying the family publicly. I told him the truth, yet it destroyed itself long before I arrived at that dinner. When I hung up, I realized something strange. I didn't feel satisfaction or pain, just quiet. The kind that doesn't sting, doesn't heal, just settles. I checked my phone. No messages from Sierra, no missed calls. She was gone. And for once, silence felt right. The house was empty, but for the first time in months, it didn't feel haunted. It felt like a place waiting to be rebuilt. The morning after the dinner, the world felt oddly quiet. I woke up to sunlight leaking through the curtains of a hotel room that wasn't mine, surrounded by the faint smell of new carpet and disinfectant. There were no unread messages, no angry calls, no apologies, just stillness. It was a different kind of peace, the kind that comes only after everything collapses and there's nothing left to salvage. By noon, the first tremors began. Harold's company was in chaos. The auditors had already started their review, and word spread faster than I expected. Justin tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, a clerical oversight, but Laura had already handed over her recordings and the duplicate invoices. His entire scheme unraveled in less than 48 hours. The same arrogance that made him think he could have my fiancée and her father's company made him sloppy. Sierra called once that day. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was long, full of sobs and circular sentences. She claimed she didn't know about the fraud, that Justin manipulated her, that she only wanted to help him with consulting work. She said she didn't want to lose me. The message ended with a whisper, something between a plea and a command. Please, don't ruin me. But I didn't have to. She was already doing that on her own. Within a week, Harold stepped down as CEO. His name had become toxic among investors. Even though the auditors hadn't charged him with wrongdoing, he liquidated several assets and sold off part of the company to protect the remainder. He called me again, this time not as a businessman, but as a father. He didn't ask for forgiveness, only for silence. He said he'd always respected me and that he was sorry his daughter hadn't. I told him it wasn't my silence he needed, it was his daughter's honesty. After that, he never called again. Sierra moved out quietly. Her father gave her one last check, a settlement of sorts. Enough to keep her from collapsing completely, but not enough to rebuild the life she'd destroyed. She rented a small apartment downtown and disappeared from everyone's radar. 2 months passed. I spent most of that time working obsessively, methodically, without breaks. The office became my shelter. I used the portion of Harold's company that I'd taken over and merged it into my own practice. By the third month, Cole Urban Design was officially registered. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Built clean from the ground up, no lies in its foundation. Then one rainy afternoon, Laura Wardell came to my office. She looked calmer than the last time I saw her, tired but lighter somehow. She carried a small folder and a cup of coffee for me. She said Justin had fled the state after the audit results went public. His accounts were frozen, his license revoked. She'd filed for divorce. She handed me the folder, copies of the legal filings and her finalized settlement. She said it was over. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain against the windows. I expected awkwardness, but there wasn't any, just understanding. Two people who'd been collateral damage in someone else's chaos, now sitting on the other side of it. Before she left, she said something I didn't forget. She said, "We're the lucky ones, you know. We got out before the whole building fell." After she left, I worked until midnight. The city lights outside blurred into streaks across the window. I wasn't sure if I was rebuilding or simply running away from the wreckage, but for the first time it didn't matter. The line between escape and progress had vanished. Then one night in December, Sierra reached out again. She sent a message at 2:14 a.m., a single photo. It was of a baby crib, still empty, next to a hospital bed. No caption, no explanation. I didn't reply. 2 days later, a short letter arrived in the mail. Her handwriting was shaky but still recognizable. She wrote that Justin had vanished completely, that his accounts were gone, and she was left to handle everything alone. She said she gave birth to a boy, but didn't have the courage to put his father's name on the certificate. She asked if I'd ever consider meeting him, not as a father, but as someone who once loved her. I read it twice, then tore it in half and dropped it in the trash. Whatever pity I had left wasn't love, it was fatigue. She wasn't part of my story anymore. She was a footnote in the blueprint of who I'd become. Months passed quietly. My company grew. We landed a major redevelopment contract, ironically on one of the same projects Harold's firm had lost. The investors called it a clean start. I called it symmetry. That same week, I received a parcel at the office, no return address. Inside was a small black velvet box. I recognized it instantly, the one I'd used to hold Sierra's engagement ring. When I opened it, the ring was gone. In its place was a man's wristwatch, the same one Justin used to wear, the one I'd seen him wearing the night I came home early. The back of it was engraved, "He was never worth it." I didn't know whether Sierra had sent it or if it was some last gesture from Justin before vanishing, but either way, it was the final echo of that night. I placed the watch in my desk drawer and locked it away without another thought. Time, I realized, had done what I couldn't. It erased her. A year later, Cole Urban Design won a National Architecture Award for its first project, an urban housing redevelopment named Project 3AM. It wasn't a coincidence. That was the hour everything began to change, the moment the truth opened my front door and walked straight into my life. When I stood on stage to accept the award, I thought about the man I'd been that night, tired, trusting, half asleep to the life he thought he was living. That version of me was gone. What replaced him wasn't bitterness, just clarity. After the ceremony, I walked out into the city night. The air was cool, the streets wet from a light drizzle. Neon signs reflected across the puddles, painting the pavement in shifting colors. Somewhere out there, Sierra existed, perhaps struggling, perhaps pretending she was fine. It didn't matter anymore. I took out my phone and deleted her last message. Then I looked at the skyline, the tall steel structures cutting into the fog. I'd built something that wouldn't fall apart when a door opened at 3 a.m. The past wasn't gone, but it was quiet now. And for the first time since that night, I went home not to a house, but to a life that was completely mine.